Good morning. This is my research presentation on hysteria in the 1800s to the 1900s. But I will be giving obviously, 500 BC little history. Hippocrates suggested in 500 BC that ailments that affected females instead of males could be traced back to the womb. He also believed that the womb was a free floating, wandering animal. Also, a few hundred years later, a Roman physician theorized that this movement of the womb was caused by sexual deprivation. Some symptoms of hysteria that have pretty much stayed the same the entire time hysteria has been around. Um, Trouble breathing, fainting, not eating, outbursts, nervousness, irritability, over-sexualization, under-sexual, muscle spasms and contractions, also paralysis of limbs. It's basically a catch-all for symptoms that did not have a known causal, like physical causal factor. Wandering uterus, what they described as that is it would literally move about the body and cause different symptoms. So if somebody was having a hard time breathing, maybe the uterus was up in the neck area, around the throat. Um, so then another thing that they thought was a cause was retained seed or menstrual fluid. They referred to the natural discharge during an orgasm of seed or semen in women, thinking that an excess amount of this was causing hysterical symptoms to form. Treatments for this included getting married. So if a woman was single, they would be like, you need to get a husband. If the woman was widowed or somebody who couldn't marry, like a nun, then genital massage would be prescribed, leading to orgasm, and that would reduce some of the symptoms. So, in the bid of having genital massage, the vibrator was created so that the doctors wouldn't have to spend an hour doing this. It would be a 10-minute procedure at best. Another more invasive one was the clitorectomy, which is the removal of the clitoris, which is pretty awful. I didn't find too many references of this in my readings, but there were some. And then a not very invasive was smelling salts. So they imagine that if the uterus was up by your throat, if you inhaled, bad smelling salts, that you would force the uterus to go back down to where it was supposed to be because it didn't like that smell. And you could place perfumes in the groin area to have the uterus go back to where it was supposed to go. So up until this point, it was very women's problem. So in 1859, Broquet was a physician, and he published a paper talking about that this was not a women's only disease. It was a disease of the mind. And he also kind of went into the social and economical factors of it, which hadn't been done. So he thought the 1 in 3 city dwelling women were hysterics, challenging the idea that patients came from that most patients did come from affluent classes that did not have to work. And he was like, no, this is something that affects everybody, especially the working class. Oh, and he was also one of the first people to not associate it with female reproductive organs. So despite his progressive views, he still had a lot of, he did think the cause was not conforming to typical gender roles. Now, this is a time of great industrial upheaval, and people are moving from the country to the city to work, and that includes women. And he was saying that, women are designed to have emotionally heightened so that they can better care for their children and husband. If they're not doing that, then that could cause them to be hysteric. And he also believed that hysteria was hereditary and that it was passed down from a mother to her children. There's more information on this slide, but in the sake of time, I'm going to skip over it. Feel free to come back and read it. So then you had the neurologist, Charcot, and Charcot describes hysteria as something that affected both genders. He thought that it was caused by some sort of trauma to the brain or nervous system. So yet again, this is another thought of how hysteria formed in the body. He examined the consequences of occupational accidents, especially railroad accidents, because he did find hysteric men as well as women, but the majority were women. He was very scientific with his measures. He would dissect his patients after they had passed to see if he could find an associated lesion with their symptoms. For hysteria in particular, he never could find an associated lesion on the brain or spinal cord to link it to hysteria. Carcot also experimented with different types of treatments. Most famously was hypnosis. This was a time where hypnosis became wildly popular, and it was due to him and his hospital in Paris being a teaching hospital. So people, even the layman, could come and watch these demonstrations of Carcot hypnotizing these hysterical women and making them go into different body positions that were very uncomfortable, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner. And they would be able to maintain these positions for incredible amounts of times under hypnosis. Well, he thought that that was a good way to reduce hysteric attacks. The women would be put in a lot of bizarre, inappropriate scenarios that had a lot of sexual overtones to them. In today's world and medical field, that would be highly inappropriate, and doctors would be getting into a lot of trouble over it. So after Carcot died in 1893, there was a very rapid reinterpretation of what hysteria was. Some people thought it was just an emotional state. Some people thought that it was suggestion. So then you came to Sigmund Freud, who happened to be a student of Carcot. He built off of his theories, but established that repressed memories and early sexual experience could affect the subconscious and unconscious. And he believed the hysterical symptoms developed when memories were too painful or too embarrassing to talk about, which were converted into bodily symptoms. And Freud called this conversion hysteria. In modern medicine, there is a conversion disorder, which is the modern term for hysteria. It was taken from the Freud's conversion hysteria. And today, people who experience this are not listened to by medical professionals as to what they are feeling, because there's no known physical reason behind the symptoms. So that one theme is throughout this entire history of hysteria, even to today, is that since there's no physical causal factor that doctors can see and can measure, they don't listen to their patients as much as somebody that has a physical symptom that they're like, oh, I know what this is. So that's a big underlying theme. So I have my references right here, and if I have way more information in the slides, but for the sake of time, I skipped over some stuff. So feel free to go back and look, because I thought it was an extremely interesting topic. So everybody have a good day.